Welcome to the Bourne Property Show with myself, Lewis Thorogood, sales manager here at the Hill & Clark Bourne office, and I'm joined by my new assistant, glamorous assistant, Gemma. Welcome, Gemma.
Thank you very much, Lewis. It's a pleasure to be here on the Bourne Property Show.
Excellent. Mike is behind the camera this week, so after, you may well give a wave at some stage, who knows, there he is. So after last week and his revelation of his facial hair, the protests and the polls have said that he needs to be behind the camera now. So I've got Gemma, who's going to do more than a good job. So let's talk about tonight's schedule and what we're going to be discussing in the features this evening. So, coming up in this week's show, we've got our Hot Topic feature.
We've got a While of Bourne feature.
Our Agent's Advice section.
And as always, if you would like to like and share and drop your comments in the comments section below, that would be fantastic.
So our first feature this evening, this week's Hot Topic. Gemma and I have been out and about on the road, and something which came out in the media this week is how mortgage customers have spent over £53 million in wasted money sitting on lenders' standard variable rates. Latest figures have shown that over £53 million has gone to waste from homeowners not renewing their mortgage deal when their fixed rate term has ended. That's meaning that on average homeowners are spending an extra £371 in their mortgage repayments when they could be looking to get a new fixed rate when their term expires. On average, 42 days after their end of their mortgage product, homeowners are allowing them to go to what's called the SVR, which is the standard variable rate. That's meaning that that's going more in line with not only the Bank of England base rate, but also the mortgage lender's default rate. The advice from the mortgage of council lenders and indeed some of the major national lenders is to try and get your remortgage into place around about 2 to 3 months before the end of your deal. The average remortgage time is taking around about 4 to 8 weeks to go through. So the advice therefore is to have a look at your mortgage rate, find out how long you've got left and ensure that you can get yourself into a position to get the best possible rate in the current marketplace. There is also an effect of Brexit which comes in the next 12 to 18 months. So again, the advice from many national lenders and indeed the Bank of England is to ensure that you have a look at this to get the best possible rate, which ties you in for a minimum of a 2-year deal, ideally longer, to ensure that you've got protection going into the Brexit period. From the perspective of Hill & Clark, obviously we want to make sure that we can give you advice where possible, and we use what's called the Mortgage Advice Bureau, who are an independent independent mortgage broker that can offer a selection of panelled lenders that can get you the best rate possible. So if you want some advice and indeed you want some further information, please feel free to contact us at the office, pop in, give us a call, drop us an email or visit our website and we'll be able to assist you in making sure that you're not caught out on overpaying the standard variable rate when your fixed term mortgage ends.
That was a fantastic feature from you there, Lewis. If you have any comments about this topic, don't forget to leave them in the comment box below and let us know your thoughts on that.
So, on to our next feature, and Gemma's been out and about. We've both been out and about around the town today, and I believe we've been speaking to one of the local business people.
We have, yes. In our next topic, While of Bourne, we have spoken to Simon from Big Wash down in Wherry's Lane in Bourne.
Hello there, it's Lewis from the Hill & Clark Bourne office. I'm with Simon, who's the owner of Big Wash down Wherry's Lane in Bourne. So Simon, you've lived in the Bourne area and indeed obviously owned a business here for a long time. What do you like about living and working in Bourne?
32 years living in Bourne, absolutely fabulous. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. 16 years business owner, again fabulous. I've got a very large customer base. Every one of them, I would say, is a lovely person. Can't think of one that I wouldn't want to, say, have a meal with. Bourne itself, wonderful place to live, peaceful, busy, vibrant, everything you'd wish.
That's great, Simon, appreciate that, thank you. Fantastic, Gemma. So again, another local business joining us here on our broadcast of the Bourne Property Show. And indeed, if there are any local businesses that would like to be part of our weekly broadcasts, we welcome anybody that runs a business locally to the town. Feel free to pop into the office, drop me a line here at the office, drop me an email, and we'll be happy to come out and see you.
In today's agent advice, we're going to be discussing how much collapsed property sales are costing sellers.
Yeah, a really interesting subject which has come out in the media this week, that over £400 million a year it's costing sellers in failed transactions. And the biggest issue that the sellers are finding at the moment is that 1 in 5 transactions are where buyers are changing their mind at the last minute.
So how many transactions are collapsing?
Yeah, so looking at the UK statistics at the moment, over 300,000 transactions are collapsing each year, as I mentioned earlier, costing sellers over £400 million each year.
So Lewis, how much is this costing sellers?
On average, it's costing a seller just over £2,700 per transaction, and in some cases, over 12% of the failed transaction is costing a buyer over £5,000, which is a staggering amount, really. And there is a lot of feedback coming nationally now from conveyancing groups and indeed regulatory bodies about trying to change the processes involved, very much like in Scotland, that a transaction once agreed is legally binding.
So Lewis, what are the reasons for this happening? Why is this happening?
Yeah, there's a multitude of reasons, really. 39% of buyers in the national statistics that have come out have pulled out of transactions due to them changing their mind or indeed finding another property altogether. A staggering 28% have pulled out of transactions due to finances not being in place, which is a really worrying statistic, bearing in mind the national average of transactions falling through is 20%. And we'll look at that in a little bit more detail later in terms of how we can reduce the risk of these situations occurring. The other element, which is really quite worrying, is that nearly 1 in 10 buyers have actually come back to a seller just before exchange of contracts and tried to renegotiate the agreed figure. And what that basically has put a lot of sellers is into a situation whereby they felt pressured and forced, because they may have an onward purchase and they may have indeed incurred quite a bit of expenditure themselves, both on their sale and their future purchase. They feel pressured to accept that lower amount to be able to get the transaction through in the first place.
So Lewis, who does this affect?
Yeah, the key really is sellers. They're the ones that are most significantly out of pocket. 1 in 4 sellers said they'd already spent money on legal and conveyancing fees up front, whilst 13% of those transactions had already paid out search fees. Now, if we use Bourne area as an example, the average amount spent on search fees up front at the start of a transaction comes in at around about £300, which is an upfront cost which has to be incurred. The other aspect as well is that 15% of sellers have also paid out on the survey for their onward purchase, and survey fees can range anything from £400 to £500 up to £1,000, so a significant cost implication there to the sellers. 1 in 3 people were also, and this is sellers, 1 in 3 people were also quite put off about putting their home on the market because of chains, and that fear of a chain actually collapsing.
Okay, we've got some great advice for you now on how you can reduce that risk.
Yes, there are many elements to look at, but we're going to try and keep this quite short and simplified where we can. This really starts, and we'll look at some of the points that have been mentioned of sellers' fears and indeed situations that have occurred. So first and foremost, we've got to look early doors about the transaction of the buyer. And making sure that they can afford the property. So it's mentioned earlier on that 19% of the transactions that have failed are due to finances and not being able to get a transaction through. So an estate agent's duty of care to the seller is to make sure that the buyer can afford the property and that they are in a position to proceed. So a requirement of an estate agent, if they require a mortgage, is to see sight of a decision in principle or an agreement in principle from their lender to have confirmation that they can get a mortgage accordingly. If they're a cash purchaser, they need to make sure that before a transaction is agreed, that the proof of funds are produced on site, so they can obviously go back to their client and confirm that they can afford the property. The last aspect is that if they're going to be cash from the sale of their property, that they have a good knowledge of how much they've sold their property for, that if a mortgage was on their property that they were selling, that when that is taken out and cleared from the transaction, that there are the right available funds left over to enable them to buy that property with confidence. It's also then really, really important that we get commitment from the buyer. And within the first 7 days of a sale being agreed, it's really, really important that the estate agent has certain boxes ticked off to ensure that that buyer is committing themselves financially, and that is the key. So what we're looking at here when a transaction is agreed, has the buyer sent their confirmation of instructions back to their conveyancer or solicitor? That's a sign of intent immediately. Have they dropped in their identification to their solicitor as well, so they can start the relevant checks under money laundering? Have they parted, as we mentioned earlier on, with search fees? That's the first real big financial commitment. As I mentioned earlier, searches come in at around about £300 in the Bourne area, on average, with the local authority and searches that are required. So when a buyer is parting with that money, that's a real sign of intent that they're going to proceed quickly. And within that 7 day period as well, and this is the key, and you must make sure that your estate agent is chasing this and acknowledges to you when this is in place, or indeed when the survey access is called for, that the survey is instructed. So if they are having a mortgage, or if they're a cash buyer and they want a survey as reassurance on what is, let's face it, their biggest purchase that they will make, that survey is instructed within the first 7 to 10 days maximum. So your estate agent needs to do the following. So this is a checklist for you to really write down now to make sure you're asking these questions of your agent. Has your buyer sent instructions back? Indeed, and making sure that you've sent your instructions back as well. Have they paid their search fees? Have they dropped their identification in? Do we have proof and confirmation of funds? And making sure that all of those, along with survey instruction, so access as we call it, has been booked in to come and do the survey, is done within the first 7 to 10 days. That's a real simplified checklist that if your estate agent hasn't provided the answers to you within that time frame, you need to be having a conversation with your agent and getting them to question and push the buyer for commitment. Because my recommendation is that if that goes on 2 or 3 weeks without a valid reason, I would really be thinking about whether I've got the right buyer on my home, and also making sure that if needs be, the property goes back on the market to protect you, the seller. Remember, the estate agent, your estate agent, is contractually obliged to work for you. You are their client, so they work for you and not the buyer. So from my perspective, it's about making sure that they are thorough when the offer is agreed for that first 7 to 10 days. And on average, you could be, the buyer could be spending up to and over £1,000 early doors. So for me, that's a really important sign that if that sort of money is being spent early doors, it's a real sign of commitment that the transaction can go through. Yes, there will always be prolonged elements of the transaction when it's going. Searches on average in this area are taking 2 to 3 weeks, in some cases 4 weeks to come in. But as long as they're applied for early doors, that transaction can get through quickly. And for me, you should be looking to get your transaction through to exchange of contracts within an 8-week time frame.
Okay, so Lewis, can you tell me a little bit more about what we do to help our exchange go along a bit faster?
Yeah, really important from the outset when a transaction is agreed, and as we call it, everything is packaged and we've got all the relevant information in. First thing from the outset, in the memorandum of sale, which goes out to all parties, the seller, the buyer and their relevant solicitors, we confirm in writing an 8-week exchange target. Therefore, all parties are aware of the expectations that are involved. There's no grey area and there's no uncertainty. So for me, that's really important that 8 weeks is set from day one. Also, as I mentioned earlier on, especially within that first 7 to 10 day window of the transaction beginning, really important that the person that sells it in the office, my colleague or myself or any of my other colleagues, that we are chasing this transaction and we are chasing all this information through early doors at least a couple of times a week. So we're meeting the deadlines of getting the commitment sent through first and foremost. From there will then be a scheduled kind of works where my colleagues will chase that transaction once or twice a week to ensure that we're getting all the information across and communication to you as the seller, and to ensure that this transaction goes through smoothly. And if there are any issues, because of our local relationships we have with our local conveyancer here in the town in particular, if there are any issues that can be addressed, dealt with in any way that we can do the legwork or help out, we can attend to this and really focus on this straight away to avoid any delays. Because what we find is one of the most stressful elements to actually a house sale is the legal process, is the lack of communication, is the lack of feedback, and that kind of fear of the unknown on what's going on.
Thank you very much, Lewis. That was some fantastic agent's advice. If you've had any bad experiences, good experiences, don't forget to leave them in the comment box below. Let us know, we'd love to hear.
And just to really build on what we've discussed this evening, going into next week, we're going to be putting a blog on bournepropertyblog.co.uk, which gives you a little bit more information about what we've discussed today regarding the transactions and then obviously another viewpoint. So that will go online starting next week. So visit bournepropertyblog.co.uk and you'll be able to get further information on this topic.
All of the episodes of our show are now uploaded onto our YouTube channel. Don't forget to go to Hill and Clark and watch all of them.
Fantastic. And obviously, let's close the show this week. Thank you to Gemma on your debut.
Much,
done very, very well. Mike's now out of a job, so he'll stay behind the camera for the foreseeable future unless we get enough comments to ask him back, but I'm sure he won't mind that. But we look forward to next week's show. We'll be bringing you obviously a further broadcast with lots of interesting information, agents' advice, hot topics, and indeed bringing you as much information about the local property market. So thank you, Gemma, once again, and have a good week.